On a humid July night, in 2012, 21-year-old Chavis Carter was sitting in the back of a police cruiser in Jonesboro, Arkansas. The official narrative put forward by the Jonesboro Police Department is that while left completely alone in the vehicle, Chavis produced a concealed handgun and took his own life. But the forensic reality and the physical evidence paint a much darker, fundamentally broken picture. The authorities expect the public to believe that a left-handed man who had just been aggressively searched by police not once, but twice, managed to find a missed weapon, contort his arms while double-locked in handcuffs behind his back, and shoot himself perfectly in the right temple. Today, we are going to tear apart the anatomy of a physically impossible ruling, examine the staggering arrogance of an internal investigation that cleared its own officers, and expose what happens when law enforcement decides that the laws of physics simply do not apply to them. The timeline of the 28th of July 2012 begins like countless other routine, mundane encounters with the law. It was shortly before midnight. A Jonesboro police officer, Keith Baggett, was responding to a call about a suspicious vehicle driving up and down a residential street. He spotted a white pickup truck matching the description and initiated a traffic stop. Inside the truck were 3 young men. The driver and the passenger in the cab were both white. In the bed of the truck, riding in the back, was Chavis Carter, a young black man. Officer Baggett called for backup, and Officer Ron Marsh soon arrived on the scene. The officers approached the vehicle, separated the men, and began running their identities. They asked for permission to search the young men. Chavis, who was entirely cooperative, stepped down from the truck bed. Officer Baggett patted him down. This was not a cursory glance. This was a trained law enforcement officer conducting a physical search of a suspect's person. During this first search, Baggett found a small amount of marijuana in Chavis's pocket. He found some empty plastic bags. He also found a scale. But critically, Officer Baggett did not find a weapon. No gun, no knife, nothing that posed a threat to the officer's safety. Because of the drug paraphernalia, Chavis was detained, but he was not yet placed under arrest. He was instructed to sit in the back of Officer Baggett's squad car while the officers ran their names through the system. It was during this background check that the system flagged a hit. Chavis Carter had an outstanding warrant out of Mississippi. It was a relatively minor offense, a probation violation stemming from a previous drug charge, but it was enough to elevate the situation from a detention to a full custodial arrest. Officer Baggett returned to the cruiser, ordered Chavis out of the back seat, and informed him that he was under arrest. At this point, standard police protocol dictates a secondary, far more rigorous search. When a suspect is officially taken into custody and is about to be transported, officers are trained to thoroughly check for any concealed weapons or contraband that might have been missed during the initial Terry frisk. Officer Baggett searched Chavis Carter for a second time. Once again, he patted down his torso, his waistline, his legs, and once again, according to the officer's own reports, he found absolutely nothing. Satisfied that the suspect was clean, Officer Baggett took out his handcuffs. He brought Chavis's arms behind his back, placed the steel cuffs on his wrists, and engaged the locking mechanism. Chavis was then escorted back to the squad car and placed in the rear passenger seat. The door was shut. The window was rolled up. Chavis was, for all intents and purposes, completely secured. The officers then turned their attention back to the other 2 men from the truck. They were standing near the front of the police cruiser, running the driver's information and discussing the details of the stop. The dashcam video from the cruiser captures the mundane audio of this conversation, but minutes later, the routine nature of the stop evaporated. A sharp, loud, popping sound echoed through the humid night air. The officers rushed to the squad car. They opened the rear door. Inside, Chavis Carter was slumped over, bleeding profusely from a catastrophic gunshot wound to his head. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos. Paramedics were called, and Chavis was rushed to a nearby hospital, but the damage was too severe. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Now, we must stop and examine the immediate narrative established by the Jonesboro Police Department. Before an autopsy was even conducted, before the gunshot residue tests were processed, before any independent oversight could be established, the department released their official statement. Chavis Carter had committed suicide. They claimed that during the course of the two physical searches, both officers had somehow failed to detect a 380 caliber Cobra semi-automatic handgun concealed on Chavis's person. They claimed that once left alone in the cruiser, Chavis managed to retrieve this weapon while handcuffed behind his back. And finally, they claimed that he managed to maneuver the weapon to his own head and pull the trigger. To understand the sheer absurdity of this conclusion, we have to look closely at the weapon itself. A 380 Cobra is not a tiny, easily concealable derringer. It is a solid piece of metal. It has weight. It has a distinct profile. The idea that two veteran police officers missed a semi-automatic handgun during two separate physical pat-downs defies every principle of police training. If they missed the gun, it is a display of gross, almost criminal incompetence. But the truth of how the gun got there is a question the department desperately wanted to avoid asking. But the presence of the weapon is only the first anomaly. The physical mechanics of the shot itself are what tear the official narrative to shreds. The autopsy report revealed that the bullet entered Chavis's skull on the right side, slightly above and behind the right ear. It traveled in a leftward, slightly upward trajectory. Chavis Carter was completely left-handed. We are asked to believe that a left-handed man, handcuffed tightly behind his back, managed to reach around his body, contort his arm up his side, angle a heavy semi-automatic weapon up to his right temple, his non-dominant side, and pull the trigger with enough leverage to inflict a fatal wound. Try to physically mimic that motion right now. Try to imagine your wrists bound together at the small of your back, and then attempt to touch your opposite temple with the palm of your hand facing inward to simulate holding a pistol grip. It is a biological contortion act that borders on the impossible. And this is where we pivot into the chilling reality of systemic failure. When a civilian dies in police custody under impossible circumstances, the system is supposed to demand answers. The justice system is built on the premise of investigation, logic, and holding those in power accountable. But when the suspect is a young man with a warrant, and the narrative threatens the careers and the public image of a police department, the system does not investigate. It closes ranks. It protects its own. It manufactures a reality that fits the paperwork, no matter how profoundly insulting that reality is to the victim's family and to basic human intelligence. The public outrage in Jonesboro and across the country was immediate and visceral. The community demanded an independent investigation. They pointed out the blatant physical impossibilities of the suicide theory. They asked the obvious question: did an officer accidentally or intentionally discharge a weapon and subsequently plant the 380 to cover their tracks? In response to the mounting pressure, the Jonesboro Police Department did not open their files to an independent civilian oversight board. They did not suspend the officers pending a thorough, outside criminal probe. Instead, they conducted an internal investigation. They investigated themselves. And their response to the public's outrage was a masterclass in bureaucratic arrogance. To prove that Chavis Carter could have shot himself, the department released a video to the media. In this video, they used a police officer of roughly the same height and build as Chavis. They handcuffed this officer behind his back, put him in the back of a cruiser, and handed him an unloaded gun. The video is difficult to watch, not because of graphic violence, but because of the sheer disrespect it represents. The officer in the video strains, twists, and violently contorts his shoulder joint, awkwardly dragging his handcuffed hands up his side. He manages to blindly point the barrel of the unloaded gun somewhere near his neck and ear. The police department presented this as definitive proof. They pointed to the video and effectively said, "See, if you dislocate your shoulder and bend your wrist to the point of breaking, it is physically possible to point a gun at your own head." They ignored the fact that the officer in the video knew exactly what he was trying to achieve and was in a controlled environment. They ignored the fact that Chavis was left-handed and the shot was to his right temple. They ignored the gunshot residue test. Let's talk about that residue test. When a firearm is discharged, it violently expels a cloud of microscopic particles, barium, antimony, and lead. This gunshot residue, or GSR, coats everything in the immediate vicinity, especially the hands of the person firing the weapon. The Arkansas State Crime Lab processed the swabs taken from Chavis Carter's hands. The results were explicitly clear. The swabs from his right hand tested negative for gunshot residue. The swabs from his left hand tested negative for gunshot residue. The police department dismissed this. They brought in experts to testify that GSR can sometimes be wiped away, or that the enclosed space of the police cruiser somehow altered the dispersion pattern. They engaged in Olympic-level mental gymnastics to explain away every single piece of forensic evidence that contradicted their suicide narrative. They had their conclusion. The facts were just an inconvenience they needed to manage. The DOJ and the FBI eventually reviewed the case after immense pressure from civil rights organizations. But federal investigations into local police departments require proving a willful deprivation of civil rights, an incredibly high legal bar. Ultimately, the federal government declined to bring civil rights charges against the officers. The officers were cleared. They returned to duty. The official cause of death remains a suicide. This case is not just about a botched search or a questionable autopsy. It is a stark, horrifying demonstration of absolute authority. The police department wrote a narrative that defied gravity, logic, and physical anatomy. And because they wear the badge, that narrative became the legal truth. They looked the public in the eye, presented an impossible physical equation, and forced everyone to accept it. It leaves us with a terrifying realization. If the system wants to sweep your death under the rug, the laws of physics will not save you. The truth is irrelevant when the people writing the reports are the same people holding the guns. If you thought the cover-up in Jonesboro was a masterclass in sweeping impossible facts under the rug, wait until you see how a team of detectives actively destroyed evidence to protect a billionaire heir from a double homicide conviction. Click the video on your screen to see the case they tried to bury and how the ruling class buys their way out of murder.